Hello, and welcome to Other Voices Online, a monthly conversation for activists. Other Voices is brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. I'm your host, Paul George. I try really hard to be as timely as I can putting these programs together, and I thought this one for sure was timely. Just 11 days ago, the United States used the largest weapons in its arsenal, just this side of nuclear weapons, to bomb a country that it was not at war with, was not threatening us. And I thought for sure it would be a major story for a long time. But here we are 11 days later in the era of Trump and the 24-hour news cycle, and it's practically disappeared from the headlines. But I think tonight's program will give you a good indication why that's kind of a false front, because this has all the ramifications of not being the end of something, but the beginning of something new. And to help us understand that, I'm glad to be joined once again by a good friend of Other Voices in the Peace and Justice Center, Professor Joel Beinin. Joel is the Donald J. McLaughlin Professor of History and Professor of Middle East History, Emeritus at Stanford University. Joel's research and writing focus on the social and cultural history and political economy of modern Egypt, Palestine, and Israel, and on U.S. policy in the Middle East, if we can figure out what it is. He has written or edited 12 books, and he has been very generous in sharing his time and expertise with Peninsula Peace and Justice Center and our members for over 3 decades now. And when I say something like that, Joel, I feel really old. But welcome back to Other Voices. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Paul. I don't think we're going
Uh-oh.
to be able to hide the fact that we're aging.
I've given up trying. So let me start here. There seem to be two competing narratives out there, and I don't think anybody knows what the real story is. One is that the Trump administration, and Trump in particular, after promising no more forever wars, really wanted to try to negotiate some kind of agreement with Iran. And Israel's attack on Iran to wipe out its nuclear program took them by surprise, and the Trump administration was kind of backed into having to support Israel. The other narrative, and this is one that Iran seems to subscribe to, is that the United States was in cahoots with Israel all along, dragged out the negotiations as a distraction, and to kind of lull Iran into not being quite as alert as possible, undermined the negotiations by insisting on no purification of uranium and no missiles either. So probably somewhere in between is the truth, but what's your take on these competing narratives?
Somewhere in between is about right. So in order to make any sense of what happened at all, we have to put 3 pieces of information into play. One is that Trump fancies himself as a brilliant deal maker and doesn't like war. Not because he's such a great humanitarian, but from the point of view of a real estate mogul. I mean, war destroys property. He's not a 2, Benjamin Netanyahu has been warning that Iran will get a nuclear weapon next year, next month, tomorrow, next week, for 20 years or so.
Right.
So this has been a big theme of his. And 3, Trump likes victory. So what I think happened is this. Trump did fancy that he could make a deal with Iran and was trying to do that. Israel was very alarmed at the prospect that such a deal might succeed and not include all of its desiderata. And about 2 weeks or so before Israel unleashed its attack on Iran, there were discussions from which the Trump administration could understand that Israel was going to attack Iran unilaterally. So they gave a light that was somewhere between yellow and green. That's all the Israelis need. Any color other than flashing red means they're going to do it. And as we heard after the initial Israeli attacks, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, no, we didn't have anything to do with this. No, Israel did this. And technically speaking, at least at the most kinetic level, the United States didn't have anything to do with it. They weren't engaged in refueling or bombing or anything. Did they share intelligence with Israel? Almost undoubtedly, although how would people like us know something like that? And then when Israel's attack succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, Trump couldn't restrain himself from joining in and going in for what he thought was a one and done knockout blow. Well, it's not a one and done knockout blow. I think you were correct to suggest that this is rather the beginning of something than the end of something. And of course, Trump has no capacity for thinking strategically about very much. So I don't think that he thought, well, what happens if we do succeed in knocking out Iran's nuclear program? I mean, from the announcement that he immediately made the day after, on the basis of zero intelligence whatsoever, because there couldn't possibly have been any, Trump proclaimed total victory, and Iran's nuclear program is obliterated, and they won't be back in the nuclear business ever again. Well, how likely is that to be the case? What's more likely to be the case is that whenever Iran can recover, they'll try to build a nuclear weapon so that this doesn't happen to them again.
Yeah, Trump doesn't really, when it comes to strategic planning, he doesn't look far beyond the next news cycle that I referred to in the opening. We are such a news-driven, get Trump on TV nation anymore. Let's talk about Israel's actual goals in this. They have been saying, beating the drums about Iran's nuclear program, as you said, for 20 years or more now. But they've been more concerned with what the regime is in Iran since 1979. Are they after denuclearization or are they after regime change?
I think that the initial attack was aimed at denuclearization. When it succeeded, as well as it did, I think more vistas were opened up, and Netanyahu started to talk about the possibility of regime change. But this is
Didn't he call on the Iranian people to rise up? And I think Trump tweeted something similar.
Yes, they both did. And this is totally idiotic because everybody knows two things about this situation. One, you cannot bomb a country into submission and giving up a nuclear program. That's sort of rule of thumb in intelligence circles. And two, if you attack a country, even if it has a very unpopular government, and the Iranian government is not popular today, people will rally around the flag. Israel should have known that lesson more than anyone else because the Netanyahu government on the eve of October 7th, 2023, was not at all popular. There had been weekly demonstrations, sometimes with well over 100,000 people participating for 9 months. And yet, after Hamas attacked on October 7th, the country rallied around Netanyahu. Even people who totally hated him signed up for supporting the government. Reservists who had said they wouldn't report for service before did do it. The level of refusal was relatively low in the first months of the war. So Israel should have known that this is not a strategy.
I probably don't need to ask this, but what was the general reaction of the Israeli populace to this massive assault on Iran?
Overwhelmingly positive. More than 80% of Israeli Jews supported the attack on Iran, even parties that are nominally in the opposition to the current government.
So, what have been some of the reactions from the other neighbors in the region there? Saudi Arabia and UAE, I think initially wanted to see regime change in Iran. They haven't been fans of Iran, but I think they made the decision a long time ago that that was too expensive, both in blood and money, if it could even be accomplished, and seemed to be satisfied with denuclearization of Iran. How did some of the neighbors in the area react to this attack on Iran's
Well,
nuclear program?
generally, they were quiet. And I think it reflected a certain ambivalence. So on the one hand, a few years ago, Saudi Arabia and Iran reestablished diplomatic relations in negotiations that were brokered by China. So this was a big black eye to the Biden administration that first that the Saudis had decided, no, we aren't going to be able to isolate Iran, and we aren't going to be able to somehow encourage a regime change there. And so there they are, and we're going to have to learn how to live with them, even if we hate them, as they do. The United States obviously was not going to broker reestablishment of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, so China. So that was terrible from all points of view for the Americans and for the Israelis. Um, Other countries in what I would call the Sunni axis of reaction, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and sometimes some of the other Gulf states as well. None of them are happy with Iran. And before October 7th, 2023, they would all have been willing to sign on to an expanded version of the Abraham Accords, which resulted in Israel opening normal relations with Bahrain, with the United Arab Emirates, with a few months later, Morocco and Sudan. In exchange for just some nice language about the Palestinians. And of course, the Netanyahu government wasn't even willing to give any nice language, especially not after the current government was formed in December of 2022 with its contingent of Messianist neo-fascists. And Biden was somehow thinking that he was clever enough to overcome this obstacle, which was never going to really happen. And Trump, of course, being more closely associated with the Abraham Accords, is more invested in trying to make it happen. I don't see him succeeding either.
Is there going to be a rethinking, or maybe that's not the right word to use, but Saudi Arabia, I think, is interested in obtaining nuclear weapons. Um, and I don't know where, honestly, don't know where the others stand, but might they now be tempted um, to move ahead with that?
There are two tracks that have been publicly addressed by Middle East countries, both before and since the Israeli and American attacks on Iran. One, and Egypt had been promoting this for a long time, a nuclear-free Middle East, which makes the best logical sense. Um, I'm not, I don't have a great deal of confidence that could actually happen. The fact that it makes great sense doesn't mean that therefore that's what's going to happen. And the other is that the Saudis would press the United States for a much more formal statement of alliance and American commitment to the defense of Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have not said that they want to build a nuclear weapon. They have said they want to do the same thing that Iran has said it is doing, which is to develop nuclear power. And they're thinking about that, of course, because one day, hopefully sooner rather than later, although the Saudis hope it's later, the era of fossil fuels will end and they're going to have to rely on something else for energy. Uh, it's unclear where that can go now uh, because that requires very delicate negotiations that the Trump administration doesn't have room on its plate for now.
Yeah. So I know you're not an expert on the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but I do want to kind of explore some of those questions that Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that's one of the things that allows United Nations weapons inspectors to get in there and oversee the, keep an eye on what they're doing and assure that it's for civilian purposes and not weapons development. And that has been the case so far. But what if Iran decided to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty given this attack? I mean, they've gone along with all the rules laid out and they get bombed anyway. Uh,
So the Iranian parliament a few days ago passed a resolution saying that Iran would withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
uh,
In order for that resolution to become law, it has to be approved by Pezeshkian, the president of Iran, who is, in Iranian terms, on the more moderate side. So whether he will or will not approve that is unclear. In the meantime, Iran has not permitted inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency to enter the country and to inspect the three nuclear sites that the United States bombed to determine how much damage has been done there. And that's the best card that Iran has to play now, that no one really knows how much enriched uranium they have managed to save from the famously underground facility at Ferdo. How many centrifuges do they have that are functional? Because even if the entire underground complex at Fordo was not destroyed, centrifuges are very delicate things, and if you shake them up, they don't work. So presumably, if you unload a dozen bunker buster bombs on them, you've at least disabled the centrifuges. How many scientists with the requisite know-how are still alive after Israel carried out targeted assassinations against the top scientists and top military commanders of Iran connected to the nuclear program? So we don't know the answers to those questions, and Iran would like it to remain that way because that level of ambiguity is their best strategic card at this moment.
yeah, that's a lot of leverage to have, is not knowing after all these years, again, the question of how close are they? As you pointed out, Israel's been saying for 20 years it's imminent, but it hasn't been imminent. It just occurred to me when you mentioned the proposal for a nuclear-free Middle East. I believe that was part of the agreement at the end of, was it the first or the second Gulf War? Um,
Oh, I don't think it was ever formally agreed to. It was put forward as an aspiration. I mean, Egypt has been pushing for that at least since the early 1990s, maybe even before that. I don't remember precisely, but this has been Egypt's position forever.
well, and that's not going to happen because, and I didn't mention this, but it's important that Israel is not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and doesn't even admit to this day that it has nuclear weapons. So I don't see how a nuclear-free zone in the Middle East could even get off the ground to step one of negotiations.
No, it's not. It's not something that, given the current balance of forces, is a reasonable likelihood. I don't think so. I mean, of course, the United States, if any American administration decided that it were really going to put the screws to Israel, it could possibly get Israel to sign on to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and things like that. But that's not in the cards. That's not going to happen.
So before we leave the topic, there is the question of whether Iran did save sufficient amounts of its enriched uranium to go ahead and enrich it the final few steps and actually create a nuclear weapon. It could be anything from a sophisticated one that goes on a missile to a dirty bomb in a suitcase. Would they be tempted to actually try to use a nuclear weapon, or would they reveal its presence as more leverage, or how do you think that would be handled?
That's completely unclear. Um, Ayatollah Khomeini, the founding supreme leader of the Iranian Islamic Republic, um, famously issued a fatwa in which he said that nuclear weapons were a sin. And so Iran is not going to have them. And that remains the official policy of Iran to this day. Uh, and um, both the CIA, as expressed by Tulsi Gabbard back in March, and the International Atomic Energy Commission, International Atomic Energy Association, IAEA, yeah, in its report in May, said that there is zero evidence that Iran was moving to produce a bomb. What they were doing, and what the IAEA inspection just before the Israeli attack mentioned, is that they were enriching uranium to levels that are beyond what is typically used for civilian purposes.
Right.
So for civilian purposes, you enrich uranium to under 5%, 3 to 4%, something like that.
Yeah, 3.5%, I think is, yeah.
I think actually 3.67, but I didn't want to overload people with too many numbers.
Okay.
Then, but they were having it enriched to 60% and maybe more, although not 90%, which I think is what you need for a bomb.
Right.
Uh, and the IAEA said that they were not abiding by all the requisite safety precautions. Okay, so how serious a breach of the Non-Proliferation Treaty was that? I'm not going to give you a definitive statement about that. Iran clearly, since Trump abrogated the agreement, which would have made all of this discussion irrelevant,
Right.
had the agreement that Obama negotiated with Iran in 2015 remained in place, Iran wouldn't have any super enriched uranium, and there would have been complete inspection and all manner of other positive things might have ensued from that initial agreement. But Trump decided to blow up the agreement because it was made by Obama and therefore, by definition, bad. And here we are. So if you're the government of Iran and have seen this track record of erratic and frankly irrational behavior on the part of the United States, you're not about to make it easy to make any new agreements on this question.
Absolutely. And I think that is so important to keep in mind, that none of this would have happened if Trump hadn't bailed out of the original Iran agreement that, as you rightly point out, Obama successfully negotiated in 2015, 10 years ago. Let's turn our attention now to the other hot spot there, and that's the ongoing tragedy in Gaza. And there's been a rise of settler attacks in the West Bank. I want to talk about that as well. But let's start here when it comes to Israel and U.S. and the ongoing war in Gaza. And you were just starting to explain to this to me, the update before we went online. But the other day, Trump posted on Truth Social that Israel had agreed to the conditions for moving toward a ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza. There hasn't been any official word from Israel. And Netanyahu is due to meet with Trump at the White House this coming Monday. What's going on with the possibility of a ceasefire?
So Trump announced that Israel has agreed to terms for a ceasefire, and Israel has not officially confirmed that that is the case. And this is not the first time that that has happened. However, Gideon Sa'ar, the foreign minister, who is currently in Estonia on a tour of the Baltic states, said to the New York Times that it's looking positive for resuming negotiations with Hamas. And unnamed source leaked the terms of the proposed ceasefire. A ceasefire would be put in place for 60 days. During that period, Hamas will return 10 living hostages and 18 bodies of deceased hostages. It is believed that those numbers represent about half of all the hostages in both categories. So there are about 49 or 50 hostages, of which 20 are believed to be alive and the others, the rest, deceased. Of course, the hitch with that is that that's an agreement for 60 days. And the Israeli government might be prepared to make an agreement for 60 days. That's what happened when Trump came into office. People may remember that the Biden administration had been negotiating a similar agreement, and then the Steve Witkoff and Adam Baylor, Trump's emissaries, pushed the deal over the top so that it could come into effect before Trump was inaugurated, which he very much wanted. And then when the time was up on March 18th and the requisite number of captives on both sides had been exchanged, Israel unilaterally violated the ceasefire and began the war again. And why is that? Because Netanyahu always said he doesn't agree to a ceasefire that ends the war. He agrees to a ceasefire that pauses the war, but not one that ends the war. And Hamas has been saying for over a year, well over a year at this point, they agree to the terms that were originally negotiated back last summer. And those terms will include an end to the war and withdrawal of Israeli forces. So no, Netanyahu doesn't agree to that, and especially the two neo-fascist messianist ministers in his government don't agree to it. They keep on saying that they'll bring the government down if Netanyahu agrees to do that. So there are terms for the first stage of an agreement. But if I were Hamas, I'd be asking the Americans, and how are you going to guarantee that after the 60 days that Israel isn't going to just start up again, just as they did on March 18th? What's our guarantee that there actually will be final status negotiations that will end the war and result in withdrawal of Israeli forces from at least part of the Gaza Strip? So the United States isn't offering anything like that because it could compel Israel to do such a thing, but at great political cost. Trump is not up for that, I don't believe. So it's not at all clear that this agreement can actually happen. Although there are some in Israel who are now speculating the government, the next elections would be due in the fall of 2026. But now Netanyahu is riding high because of Israel's victory in Iran. And we shouldn't have any illusions about the fact that it was a victory. There's no point in avoiding that acknowledgement. And therefore, he might be willing to risk that the two neo-fascist messianist ministers will withdraw their parties from the coalition. And that would mean that there would have to be early elections. And given that we're now in high summer and the Knesset will soon go into summer recess, that means that nothing could happen until after the Jewish high holidays in September, October. So around maybe November or thereabouts, there could be an early Israeli election, and he might do well because of the popularity that he has gained by attacking Iran.
Let's switch because I do want to get to our viewer questions, but we've all been watching in horror the scenes at these food distribution centers in Gaza and the Israeli military routinely opening fire on these crowds. I don't know how many have been killed at this point. It's in the hundreds, I believe.
600.
600 in trying to get food. Now, Israel kind of took over the entire food distribution system in Gaza based on the claim that Hamas was diverting food. I'm not sure who they were diverting food to, but other Palestinians, I guess. But can you talk about that for a minute? What is Israel trying to accomplish by taking control of the food and keeping out international non-governmental organizations?
So after Israel starved the entire Gaza Strip for the better part of 2 months after March 18th and refused to allow any supplies to enter, of course, there isn't very much left. I mean, people have some of what they were able to save up from before or somehow get by hook or by crook. So the fundamental problem is that Israel never, not even when the ceasefire was in effect from January 19th until March 18th, never allowed adequate medical and food supplies to enter the Gaza Strip. And so therefore, when a small trickle was let in, Hamas was one of the forces that was capable of seizing it and redistributing it according to their priorities, which would, of course, mean first and foremost their fighters and their supporters and so on. And there was also this armed gang the Abu Shabaab gang, which now Israel is employing, that was seizing food and selling it at black market prices and big markups and so on. So the way to solve that problem was very simple. Let a lot of aid in. It's a question of supply and demand. If there's a lot of food and it's readily available through the agencies that have experience and expertise in delivering it, mainly the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which before 2023 was distributing about 80% of all the aid that Gaza received, but also other organizations like the World Central Kitchen and so on. Let them distribute as much aid as can be supplied. But no, Israel did not want to allow that, of course, because that would ultimately increase the resilience of the population of the Gaza Strip. So my judgment, and it is just a judgment because there's no piece of paper that anybody signed that really says this, although lots of ministers have shot off their mouths because they do that in Israel. My judgment is that Israel is trying to create the circumstances which will put the maximum pressure on the population of the Gaza Strip and to make conditions so miserable there that eventually somebody in the international community would say, oh, okay, well, now we're going to take the people out of the Gaza Strip because it's simply impossible to live there anymore. That's the highest desire of every single member of the Israeli cabinet. They haven't been able to make it happen because Egypt refuses to open its border and Jordan says it's not taking anybody and no other Arab country is taking anybody. Where will they go? Well, one idea was Libya, but no, turns out that Libya doesn't want to take them either. I mean, they're fantasizing that they can make the Palestinian population of Gaza disappear and then Israel will proceed to resettle it and Donald Trump will have his Riviera, et cetera, et cetera.
If that's their ultimate goal, they have a long way to go because whether another country will take them, the Palestinians aren't going to want to leave.
No, they don't want to leave, but neither do they have very much capacity to resist. I mean, if someone were to drive trucks into the Gaza Strip and put people on the trucks, they wouldn't. I mean, just their physical capacity to resist is greatly diminished at this point.
Yeah. Quickly, and then I want to get to viewer questions. There has been a sharp spike in attacks by Israeli settlers in the West Bank on Israeli towns. There was, it's been going on for quite a while and picking up steam. And last week there was a pretty outrageous incident in a Palestinian town by the name of Kafr Malik, and I have no idea if I'm saying that right, where fire bombs were thrown, buildings were burned, people killed, and when the Israeli military showed up, they shot the Palestinians, not the settlers who were taking the attack. What's going on? What's behind this spike in tensions and attacks in the West Bank?
So two things. First of all, going all the way back to 2021, the army and the settlers in the West Bank have increased their aggressiveness, and the response to that has been the formation of armed groups of young men who are not formally affiliated with Fatah or Hamas or Islamic Jihad, but in some cases, combination of all of them. And so the Israeli army, in response to that, went into the refugee camps of Jenin, Tulkarem, and Nur Shams and completely emptied them. So something like 30 to 40,000 Palestinians have been indefinitely displaced by that action. At the same time, the governance of the West Bank, in accordance with the guidelines of the current Israeli government, is in the hands of Bezalel Smotrich, and he is one of the two neo-fascist Messianist ministers. And he totally supports the settlers and doesn't in any way want the army to restrain the settlers. And in fact, there was an incident about a week ago in which the army did fire on settlers who were getting just a little bit too rowdy. And the other neo-fascist messianist in the government, Itamar Ben-Gvir, said that's a red line. The army can't shoot Jews. It doesn't really matter what the Jews are killing Palestinians, attacking Palestine. No, the
Right.
army can't do that. So, and that has been more or less the norm. The army does not intervene against settlers more often than not. It is either standing by watching them commit crimes or in some cases even participating with them. So all of that has been escalating since 2021, but even more precipitously since October 7th, 2023. And for some of the cabinet members, pushing Palestinians out of the West Bank is a desideratum. There was an Israeli a public opinion poll that was commissioned by my colleague Tamir Sorek at Penn State University. Its results were published in May, and it indicated that 82% of all Jewish Israelis would support expelling all the Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, and 56% of them would support expelling them from all of the West Bank. So this is a popular policy.
Those are pretty shocking numbers. Wow. Okay, let's bring the audience in here. There's two ways you can ask a question. One is to click on the raise hand button, and when you do that, our director will give you a message to allow you to unmute yourself, and you'll get a message that you can do that. And you have to unmute yourself. We can't do that. And then just ask your question using your microphone, or you can type in a question in the Q&A box by clicking on the Q&A icon. And any that come in there, I will read off to Joel. I don't see any in there yet. I don't see any hands up yet. So do hope you will participate in this and come up with your questions. Okay, Mike Caggiano has his hand up. And
Okay.
okay, welcome, Mike. What's your question?
Okay. Well, I was watching, seemed to like this Judge Napolitano. He's got a lot of retired intelligence people and retired military that seem to like Scott Ritter. A lot of people don't like him, but there's an awful lot of good information coming over his show. So he had a guy named Larry Johnson who had a map of the targets that were hit by the Iranians in the latter part of the 12-day fracas, I guess you might call it. And he says Israel was severely damaged. Not even, they actually term it as the Iranians seem to have the upper hand. And you don't get any of this from the American media, mainstream media, but these guys, that's their business. So have you heard anything to that effect? It seems like that really changes the calculus to a great degree. So have you heard anything like that?
Yeah, I'd say that's ridiculous. The Israelis, for sure, suffered significant bomb damage, especially to major civilian population centers. Some high-rise buildings were destroyed, and the price is going to be in the billions of dollars to repair what they did. Probably the most significant damage was that the laboratories of the Weizmann Institute, which is one of Israel's two MIT-like institutions of higher education, were destroyed, and so a lot of scientific research was blown up. There has been no confirmation that any significant military target was hit. So yes, Israeli civilians suffered more in this war than they have in any other war, I think it's fair to say, going all the way back to 1948. But Iran did not win this round. That's crazy.
Yeah, it demonstrates that Iran can hurt Israel, but it does not militarily have the upper hand. It seemed to be at one point who was going to run out of missiles first, the Iranians firing the missiles at Tel Aviv, or uh, Israel's Iron Dome defense, which also uses missiles. There are limited numbers on both sides, and the whole thing ended up before there was actually, we got to see who was going to win that inventory race. We have well, so here's a question. The Israel lobby has been so powerful in the United States, though we see much generational change. Bernie Sanders can't get more than 15 other senators to join him in voting against offensive weapons to Israel. Is there any hope in this picture? Is there any break on Israel's actions in Gaza if the weapons just keep flowing?
So first, let's ground ourselves in a little bit of reality. The Congress of the United States will be one of the very last institutions on this planet to change policy vis-a-vis Israel. Recall that this is the institution that voted to authorize that the United States invade Iraq on the basis of a pack of lies. How many years it took the Congress to cut funding off for the Vietnam War after the great majority of the population of the country was against the war. Congress is not going to be saving us. Eventually, when the balance of forces changes and so on, and it's no longer sustainable, and that day I think will come. Not very, very soon, but it will eventually come. And then Congress will go along with the prevailing winds. So the fact that there are a dozen and a half or 2 dozen people in the House and the Senate who are prepared to vote against sending further weapons to Israel is huge. I mean, 5 years ago, well, let's go back to in 2016, before the 2016 election, we wouldn't have imagined that such a thing was going to happen anytime soon. So there is a big shift in American public opinion. A majority of both Democrats and Republicans are against further unconditional military aid to Israel, and that is not reflected in Congress because we don't have a functional democracy. The majority of the American people are in favor of health care for all, of paid family leave, of pre-K child care, and all number of excellent ideas. And we can't get those things in through Congress because Congress is controlled by the billionaires, as Bernie Sanders is telling us every day correctly. However, all right, that's all bad news. The good news is Zoran Namdani. In the largest Jewish city outside of Israel, a Muslim supporter of Palestinian rights won 56% of the votes in the Democratic primary election, which I believe is more votes than Eric Adams, the current mayor, received when he ran in the Democratic mayoral primary 4 years ago. Well, how did he do that? Well, first of all, it turns out that a lot of Jews, and especially a lot of younger Jews, support him. Don't have any problem whatsoever with either his positions on Palestine, Israel, or his broader progressive agenda. Secondly, he brought tens of thousands of new voters into the process. Why? Because if there's a nominee or a potential nominee who actually says he is going to do something that is going to meet the needs of real people, people want that. That is what people want their government to do. So by energizing a much broader electorate and by mobilizing Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, and younger people. And to give them full credit, a lot of that was powered by the Democratic Socialists of America and Justice Democrats and Jews for Racial and Economic Justice and Jewish Voice for Peace. So he created a very powerful coalition. Okay, New York is special. It's different. It's unlike any other American city. It's also been, since the early part of the 20th century, the center of gravity of any American progressive or left-wing movement. So is this a bellwether for what will happen going forward? I don't make predictions like that, but this is a very, very substantial and important development that could lead to much greater things.
I'm glad we got that in on this discussion, even though it's a little bit far afield, but that is a significant political schism, shaking up of the order. And it's going to be interesting to see how the mainstream Democrats react long term in New York as we get up to the general election in November. I see Cheryl Spencer has her hand up. Let's try to bring her on. Cheryl, welcome. What's your
Yes,
question?
thank you. So I get most of my news from the BBC News website, okay? And some months ago, they reported and showed photographs of Gazans demonstrating against Hamas. Okay, there are some who apparently are sick and tired with what Hamas is doing in Gaza. Can you tell us more about that? What do you know about that?
I can, but not definitively. So there were two stories about that. One story is that these were spontaneous demonstrations and that they were prompted by the fact that people were hungry and didn't have proper medical treatment and so on. And there we are. And that's possible. That's possibly true. I mean, Hamas's popularity was pretty low before October 7th. And then, as we were saying with Iran, the same thing when Israel responded to Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel with massive bombing and so forth. People rallied around Hamas and supported what it had done. The other, but now that may have run its course. The other story is that Israel incited those demonstrations directly or indirectly, perhaps through this Abu Shabab gang, which historically was affiliated with the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, ISIS. So these are not good guys. And I don't know if we can say for sure which of those two stories is correct. Because there no foreign reporters are allowed into the Gaza Strip, and it's very difficult to disentangle the news from afar. I saw reports by Palestinian journalists based in Gaza, some 200 plus of whom have been killed by Israel since October 7th, but there still are some operating on the ground, who were convinced that this was a sincere expression of sentiment. How broad-based, impossible to tell under wartime conditions.
We have another question from a listener who, it's another reference on sources, asking what you think of Max Blumenthal's track record on Middle East reporting. And let me add to that question, maybe you can let our listeners know some good sources that you rely on.
So I don't think that much of Max Blumenthal. I mean, he's tended to get into the gray zone style conspiracy reporting on things. So I don't think of him as a great source. I would say look for Mu'in Rabbani's commentary. You can find, he writes extensively on Facebook, on his Facebook page, and he's in high demand for podcasts and such. And he is one of the very best and most prolific of the Palestinian analysts. Another one who is very good, who is also in high demand on podcasts and such, and I think he was on Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! Program sometime earlier this week, is Mohammed Shahada. Mohammed Shahada comes from Gaza and managed to get himself out and is now based in Europe, as is Moin Rabbani. His home base is the Netherlands. So those two guys are very, very good. Mossab Abu Toha, the poet who, after being mightily abused by the Israelis, was able to get himself and his family out of the Gaza Strip and into Cairo, and now he is based at Syracuse University as a visiting scholar. He's just published about a year ago or thereabouts his second volume of poetry. And he got a Pulitzer Prize for articles that he wrote and interviews that he gave to the New Yorker about situation in Gaza, his personal experiences getting out, and so on. And pretty regularly, he publishes the lists of the names of children who the Israelis have been killed. I know several people who are aware of it and simply can't watch because it's horrific. It's extremely painful. But if you want to know the gory details, Mossab Abu Toha is another source to look for. On the Israeli side, Plus 972, which is the country calling code for Israel and the West Bank, is an excellent e-zine. It's jointly edited by Palestinian Israelis and Jewish Israelis, both right there. And the information they have is sometimes scoops everybody. So, for example, they had the first information about Israel using artificial intelligence for targeting in the Gaza Strip, and they had the first information about what the actual rules of opening fire for the Israeli army were. So the evidence that people used to conclude pretty early on, like in the fall of 2023, that Israel's actions in the Gaza Strip were genocidal, a lot of it was based on information that had been obtained by reporters for 972. And the other source, although 972 is clearly Palestine solidarity, joint Jewish-Palestinian action. The other source is Haaretz, which is not that. But Haaretz has regularly both columns by severe critics of Israeli policy, like Gidon Levy and Amira Haas, and also their day-to-day reporting and analysis, especially Hagar Shezaf is outstanding. She's now their main West Bank reporter. And I mean, I don't know if she'd like me to be saying this, but she is a lefty. And so Haaretz employs people whose perspective on things is a reasonable one in my judgment. So those are some things you can look for.
Okay, and just a reminder to listeners, we do follow up each of our webinars with an email for further reading. And so we'll include links to all these sources that Joel just gave us. I don't see any more questions in the queue here, and we're at 8 o'clock. So closing thought, Joel, and we'll sign off.
Yeah. I think it would be good for people to bear in mind the comment that you opened with, that the 12-day war, as Israel acolytes are calling it, between Iran and Israel, and even more so, the American strike on Iran, is not likely to be the end of anything, but the beginning of a much longer and more complicated series of developments, which I won't dare to try to predict at this point, but it's not going to be a pretty picture.
And I hope when those do happen, you will come back and we'll sort it out together yet again. Joel Beinin, Professor of Middle East History, Emeritus at Stanford University. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Again, we'll be following up with an email with some further reading, so keep an eye out for that, and let your friends and family know about other voices, and get on our Peace Center email list so you don't miss any episodes. And with that,
Thank you, Paul.
I will say good night.
Good night.
Thank you for coming. Peace.